First
Hi,
of all,
Alex.
Martin, hi Martin. Thank you for your time. I'm honored to interview you about your book, and yeah, I hope that by recording this Q&A, that other people might also have a bit of clarification to your book and maybe even be inspired to read it.
Hmm.
Um, I'll give a bit of introduction because we met at Beyond Growth by coincidence,
Yeah.
and you handed me your book, uh, which is quite funny because you gave me your book, and at the same conference, Christian Felber also wanted me to give his book because I said, and then I said, I am backpacking, so I'm unfortunately have to deny you offering me your book because I can't
Ouch.
take it much more luggage at the moment. Um, and he wasn't pleased with that. But so I'm quite happy that I kept yours because else I would have never bought it by myself, I think. Um, but I'm now very happy that I read it. I kept the book for more than a year, and I think I browsed through it a couple of times, and I didn't wasn't ready yet to digest it. But earlier this year, I read Eckhart Tolle's book, and other spiritual things happened. So that was, I think, a sign for me to that I was ready to read your book. Um, and I did so last month, and I think I read it at the right time despite that it was quite, uh, yeah, very informative, but still also sometimes hard to grasp. Um, First of all, to um, one of the questions that you ask your readers is, "Am I inspired by what I read?" Yeah, definitely. um, and I also would like to add that I basically experienced, I think, the whole range of emotions apart from anger while reading your book.
That's a good
Laughing out,
thing.
yeah, yeah, seriously, laughing out loud to because of the nice parallels or metaphors that you were using, um, but also eye openers or frustrations with my own confrontation of my worldview, etc. Everything was there at some point in time during while reading. So I had zoomed out from post growth, degrowth, and green growth debate to the level of what they call the poly or meta crisis, and I was trying to understand this by studying and fact checking other people like Nate Higgins, Daniel Smachtenberger, etc., and trying to answer my own questions that came up. Um, and at the same time, I was doing a course called The Art of Living Together, based on the work of Rudolf Steiner, that took a fundamentally different approach. And it said, "Go inside," and this is basically what you also echo throughout the book. The even bigger picture that you're sketching yeah, I think it's like maybe on the level of the meta crisis, or maybe above. um, it helped me to better understand what's below, and uh, that that directly creates distance from it, which felt like a relief. Um, and you also give me a different perspective that gives me, yeah, peace of mind. Um, and at the same time, it makes me wonder: Am I wiping my conscience clean? So it's a bit of a, a tension that it gives me. Um, and mainly that wiping my conscience clean is mainly about the the caring for the earth. But I think you'll understand that because you for in your view that's not a problem, and and I think maybe, yeah, because I've spent so much time on trying to people to understand this, or trying myself to understand it that I'm like, it feels like a sunk cost in terms of my own effort. Um, and yeah, I really like the questions that you raised. Is it, what if the crises are bound to happen? What if they are natural or even serve their purpose? That's what I also really like. Um, is there something else? Yeah. Um, I'm baffled by the amount of parallels that you've been able to draw between, yeah, pregnancy and our existential situation. Like, I'm like, by the amount that you're able to draw, I'm like, this can't be a coincidence anymore. That's a thought that popped up. And at the same time, the amount of examples that you are able to share throughout the book is amazing. And I learned a ton about the human body, really. And I've been sharing the video about your book presentation before to a lot of people. And while I've already informed you that I've the on the video the metaphors or the parallels that you draw were quite hard to grasp for me, but by reading the book, they are much better to understand. So that's a, something I will add to people whenever I share the book presentation. Yeah, let me just start with the one of the first questions that I gave.
Yeah.
And this is directly a very important one to me, as mentioned. It's like with regard to resources. Yeah, for me, you make a daring statement by saying there is no shortage of resources. The universe is full of resources, full of energy and resources. Our ability to capture them is less linked to a lack of know how and tech development than to a lack of consciousness. You add, we are back to a form of inner wisdom, behaving like a cell in a global organism, which means in plain English that each human being must have access to the energy and resources necessary to fulfill his or her role, to realize his or her highest potential and allow our consumption of energy and resources to adjust and fluctuate according to the needs of our collective organism, defined at the level of the sum of each individual decision, and not a definition by our needs by a system that pushes us to consume in order to maintain the stability of the debt-based monetary system. I personally love this idea, and I wish we could start doing this tomorrow. However, you say that once a human being realizes that material gain cannot bring him peace of mind, meaning to his life or happiness, he can then take the time to familiarize himself with the abilities with what he can contribute to society. Despite the change that I see, and I have to take into account that I'm quite biased by this new economic regenerative bubble that I'm in, I don't really see us developing the sufficient amount of consciousness before either the system collapses via non resource related issues or the resources becoming so expensive that people will go look for alternatives. Or is that realization part of humanity's birth in your view?
Yeah, so thanks a lot for the question, Alex. I just wanted to quickly show the book so that everybody knows what you're referring to. So this is, it's called Mother Earth's Final Push, and you can find it on Amazon. So the story of humanity's gestation. So very interesting question. I mean, there's several dimensions to your question. The direct question is about whether we will reach the necessary consciousness, quote unquote, in time. And so, but there are many other things that you touched upon. So, the first thing that I want to raise is what proportion of humans is needed to have their consciousness raised. And so, the first thing is, how do you unlock more resources? And in the book, I think I make the parallel between accessing kind of free energy and the level of development of the baby. So if a baby is born at 5 months, for instance, it's not equipped yet with everything in the body to be able to survive in a kind of outer reality. it cannot breathe with its own lungs. Its lungs are immature, so it cannot survive in that kind of environment. And so there it would degrade and decompose. Also, the baby doesn't start breathing inside the womb because otherwise it would suffocate. And they've made a movie about this. It's called Wall-E. Probably saw Wall-E, the movie. It's like this little robot that has to clean planet Earth because it's now a big pile of junk, basically, and trash. And humanity is on the spaceship, basically surviving, the space. And in the spiritual circles, you have many people that are saying, Tesla is the greatest inventor. He was censored because he had the plans for free energy and already in the 1900s and, or the early 2000s, the 20th century. And we could have already been all, spreading across the galaxy and whatnot and have space travel. But again, like, we access the exact amount of energy that we can handle for our level of development. That's what I'm trying to convey. Is that if you give people infinite free energy at a time where they're barely coming out of a scarcity kind of mindset in like the early 20th century, where they haven't yet experienced mass consumerism, then what would have happened is we would have transformed this planet instantly into a big pile of garbage because there was just no consciousness about the impacts of DDT or pesticides and track and like all of the different microplastics and all that stuff, right? Now we have that consciousness of this cause and effect kind of link of, okay, the trash that we emit, the kind of garbage that we emit, we have to end up recycling that or we'll poison ourselves. And that again is in mirror to this idea of the baby peeing in the womb or even pooping in the womb and then suffocating its own feces. But I don't think that all of humanity suddenly has to wake up to a new realization of like there's God or whatever, or we're all one and a global organism. I think it's a certain percentage. And I talk about what I call like the concept of the psychic skin, basically, or a kind of envelope around humanity that creates a certain coherence to our experience. So inside the human body, there are certain cells that are at the same level of consciousness as cells in the outside. Like, for instance, the bacteria in your gut, they're not in any ways more enlightened than the bacteria outside, on the outside, but they're inside a kind of envelope, which creates a coherence of they're at the right place at the right time, doing the right thing within this kind of global structure. And so that's why I'm saying sometimes, even if people are not necessarily ready for a systemic change, like for instance, when we transitioned to democracy, and like French Revolution, all that stuff, people weren't necessarily ready. They weren't necessarily literate. They weren't necessarily informed enough, but, it's still, managed to create a better coherence or human experience than if we had remained under kings and queens, right? And so I think it's quite okay. I don't think that there's a problem and that we're going to miss this kind of higher consciousness. And the second thing I want to say is that it's also about what the shift is actually about. And the shift in consciousness, to me, it's more about our intentions. Do we want to survive? Or do we want to self-destruct because we hate each other and we hate ourselves, right? And so one of the biggest problems I find in the human collective is this kind of suicidal kind of intention for ourselves, that we basically hate ourselves. We think we're a cancer, a parasite, that we have no meaning for being here on this planet, that we're terrible beings, that we're creating destruction and chaos. And that without us, this planet would be a paradise of like flowers and animals, and everybody would be happy clappy. And that kind of narrative is to be the biggest problem because, in my view, the nocebo effect is when you have dark thoughts about yourselves, which tend to have a physical impact on your body. Like for instance, you break your leg and you think you'll never recover because you're going to be weak and you're going to never be able to run and do sports again. And you're self-sabotaging the capacity or the ability of your body to repair yourself or to heal. And now if you think of a nocebo effect projected on the outside, that's the effect of billions of people thinking each one in their corner, humanity is a parasite, we don't deserve to survive. That also creates effects, which can be cataclysms, which can be, all kinds of things. And that's what we don't want to see. We manage our physical pollution, so we're cleaning up the rivers and cleaning up, dumps and all that stuff, but we're not handling the terrible, destructive, self-destructive thoughts that we have about ourselves. And so imagine if half of your cells in your body wanted to die, they didn't want to live. Do you think you could survive as Alex? Right? I mean, imagine like half of your cells are suicidal. They're like, I don't, this body, this is terrible. What I'm doing is terrible. I mean, you can't survive in that kind of situation, right? And so that's to me the biggest hurdle. Like the forgiving ourselves for what we've done, in the past and what we're still doing today, and understanding that we're part of a larger purpose. I like to run this thought experiment, for instance, giving humanity a purpose so that we, can overcome this hatred for ourselves. And that's to look at very large timescales. Now, if you look at, I mean, you're familiar with this, but if you go to any conference that is talking about ecology or humanity, whatever, they project themselves in 10, 20, maybe 50 years, but not past 100. So any model, any projection, any futurologist that is talking about the future, they don't talk about what's going to happen in 100 years or more, right? But to me, in order to resolve all the issues that we face, especially our self-hatred, what we need to do is to look 200,000 billion years into the future. And no human is doing that because it's just a time scale that is so huge that we're thinking. And so one thought experiment that I like to run is what happens to life on this planet in 5 billion years, right? Do you know?
I don't know. But
Right.
one thing I would like to note is that there are this seven generation thinking is getting popular, from the good ancestor. So seven
Mm-hmm,
generations, that's a couple of centuries. So and this was already a mental leap for me, I was like,
mm-hmm.
I read the book during my sabbatical and it's like, wow, it's like a mental expansion considering
Yeah.
what we
Yeah.
leave behind 2 centuries into the future. But if you go like 200 billion
Thousand billion years into the future.
years,
Okay, so just five. Let's just go 5 billion years into the future. What happens to life on this planet?
I think it will be severely differently evolved. If it's still there.
Well, well, it won't be there. And the reason I know this is because our sun is at half of its lifetime, right?
That's it. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So I mean, our sun is pretty much 5 billion years old, something like that. And it only has 5 more billion years to go. Now, for the human, we're thinking 5 billion years. Wow, that's a lot. And this comes from astrophysics. I'm not an astrophysician, but some astrophysicists have calculated that basically the last star that will stop shining in 200,000 billion years, because at that point the universe will have evolved into a stage where there will be no more stars, but only black holes. And at the moment, a biological life needs obviously light, suns, stars, right? Um, and that means that life, potentially, biological life in its current form, has potentially a lifespan that can range to 200,000 billion years, but only if it manages to escape this planet and this solar system. Otherwise, it only has 5 more billion years to go. Now, if you take 200,000 billion years and you put that time scale to 100 years, you sort of shrink it to 100 years, which is basically a big lifespan of a human. And then you take 5 billion years and you put that also on the same time scale. Then imagine if life is just one thing. And that's the problem of humans. Like we dissect everything. We think we're separate from everything else. We're separate from the trees. We're separate from the animals. And, we're separate from everything. But if you think that life is just one thing, which it is, because according to scientists themselves, we're all the result of this one first cell that divided into other cells, and then some cells, had their own life and evolved to be, algae or whatever, and other cells evolved to being fish and whatever. But we're all part of that one thing, that one thing. So that one thing on those time scales, it has lived for 10 hours and it has 10 more hours to live. So that's basically like a baby that's born. It's lived for 10 hours and then it's going to die after 10 hours. One day out of 100 years. Do you think that that's a good life? I mean, what if you would be like, "Yay, I had a baby and it's lived for one day, beautiful life, yes." Um, no, no, that's a very short life. It's a terrible life. And so we're here crying about the fact that polar bears are going extinct or whatever. But think about how many polar bears will be able to exist in the story of the universe if we manage to get the fuck off of this planet, and spread life across the universe, outside of the solar system and whatever. In 200,000 billion years, an incalculable amount, And so it's almost like I've read this text that was kind of very angry in mind, because that's kind of the kind of anger that I have, is that we're here, crying about these little species that go extinct here and there. But all those species, if they could talk to us, they're like, get your shit together, you idiots. You are our only chance to leave this planet and to continue to live, basically. Because 5 billion years is the best case scenario. That is, if there's no asteroid that strikes the planet, if there's no more glaciation, natural climate change, which, by the way, this planet has already endured several times. I mean, the extinction of the megafauna is like mammoths and all that stuff. It's just 13,000 years ago. That is so freaking recent. So recent. And so what I'm trying to say in my book is that we are part of life. We're by no means part. I mean, this to me is the most arrogant kind of human attitude, is to think of ourselves as outside of this because we created all these mistakes and we developed in the wrong way. I mean, that's already arrogant in itself, because it's like underestimating nature's wisdom and us being a part of it. But to me, if I'm looking at this, we are just nature's attempt to survive, to live, life's attempt to survive, because it knows kind of in its own kind of infinite wisdom that if it stays on this planet, its fate is sealed, basically. Sure, I mean, ecosystems balance and there'll be some new species that will arrive after us in a couple of billion years or whatever, but nature, life, whatever you want to call it, will inevitably try to create a system for itself to survive. And that's what it's done since the beginning. I mean, single-celled organisms are already solving problems for survival. They're trying to navigate to places in the ocean where there's more resources and avoiding dangers and all that stuff. And then animals do the same, but at a higher kind of scale of complexity, trying to navigate their environment to survive and whatever. And what do humans do? Ultimately, we're just life's attempt using ideas to problem solve, to solve problems that are even more complex, which is what humans do, basically. We solve problems of trying to understand the ecosystems, trying to balance them quicker than what they would do naturally. We're trying to artificially, create abundance where nature is abundant, but, in a chaotic kind of way. We're trying to harness that abundance and control it. So we are being used by life with our capacity to have ideas and stuff to leave this planet, to spread life across the universe. We are like galactic gardeners, basically. That's how I'd like to call us. If I would have to say, what is the purpose of human beings? Like this one purpose, it would be to be galactic gardeners. I just don't see the purpose and the point of us being here. I just don't see it. What other purpose could we serve? I mean, but then again, talking about the consciousness thing, with what kind of consciousness are we going to leave this planet? Imagine a baby that is born outside its mother's womb, and then it behaves like a cancer, and it's like, oh, my job is just to grow my cells infinitely and swallow up the entire reality, right? Well, that's not going to work, right? And so the reason why we're still stuck on this planet is precisely because if we are to leave, we have to leave with the right kind of mindset and consciousness in order to be this instrument for life itself, to perpetuate itself and to express itself through all of the matter, all the planets that are there, right? And it's not just humans, it's universal, all of the species, all of that. So I mean, it was quite a broad answer, and I went on plenty of different tangents. But I think it's important to put us on the cosmic scale because we're always talking about in 10 years this or that. Um, that's not the point, right? And so, and that's also why I put the focus on harmony and finding, harmony between humans and human relations as the most important thing. Because again, a baby, if it's born into the world and its stomach is trying to digest its intestines and its immune system is attacking itself, I mean, it can't survive. And so, if you think of like the wars going on and all that stuff, it is ultimately like your organs fighting between each other, or having an autoimmune disease, which is, silly. But the reason why we have them is precisely because, and again, like you'd think, well, in nature's or life's wisdom, why didn't life create us to be only, benevolent? And the thing is, it's always a double-edged sword. You cannot have smart beings that can solve complex problems that are unpredictable in this universe, but dumb them down so that they only behave in a good way. It's just, you know what I mean? So with intelligence and the ability to solve these complex problems comes this double-edged behavior where we have at the same time the ability to save life and make life grow and expand, and at the same time destroy life and destroy ourselves, right? And now it's just about making that conscious choice of we have all this out there, all these ideas that are ultimately ways for life to manipulate itself, to perpetuate itself through ideas, concepts, and all that stuff that we've, conjured up as humans. And our goal or role is to harmonize all these ideas that we've put out there and that create all this chaos. Because ultimately, sometimes if you look at a group of humans fighting each other, I don't see them as a human fighting another human. I sometimes see an idea fighting another idea, almost as if ideas were organs in themselves. Like when you see Palestinians fighting Israelis, ultimately, those things are ideas. It's an idea of a nation, an idea of a culture, an idea of whatever, that
Yeah.
is controlling humans almost like puppets, and then, clashing, through humans as the cells of these ideas are like higher kind of organs, etherical organs. And our responsibility is now to harmonize this, and that's just the repetition in the universe. So you create new things, create new atoms, you have to arrange them in a certain way that is harmonious before you can reach the next stage. You create animals and plants and whatever, you have to create ecosystems and balance that are in equilibrium and all that stuff before you can, create these higher evolved species like humans. Then humans, they create all these ideas out there, good, evil, capitalism, communism, blah, 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 blah. And that's a whole new ecosystem of things, that if you don't assemble them in the right way, like a nice little puzzle, then, it's chaos and you cannot move on to the next level, which is to me like a conscious planet. And we can get into that further. So yeah, a
Thanks for
lot,
it.
yeah.
Thanks for elaborating on it. Um, yeah, the thing that gripped me was you saying that we are being used by life to, yeah, basically go into the universe. Um, I do have to be mindful about time. I really have a hard stop at 11, but I really would love to continue the Q&A at another time.
Sure.
Um, the If I think about us leaving now, I totally understand that we need to do it in a different with a different consciousness. But also, I think we should we will be doing it in a different form, right? Because, for instance, Musk terraforming other planets is like if I understand your book correctly, it's like mistaking the shape that we think we need to take this shape to another planet. But we basically should just embrace the development of life, and life will then take us, life will take itself in a different form to another planet, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah. So basically, imagine a planet as um, a potential for life's self-expression, of life expressing itself in a certain way, right? And think of planet Earth as like a universal seed, just like that first living cell, that first living cell in that ocean that appeared. It had the potential to manifest all of the life that we see now. And it's insane in its diversity, right? It's insane. Like if you look at the reptiles, crocodiles, and birds, and I mean, wow, and all the plants and all stuff, all from one single cell that had to be like almost calibrated perfectly to be able to develop. Otherwise, if there was it's just like a Lego piece. If the Lego piece is not exactly square, then once you assemble it, there's certain things that you can't build out of it, right? So it has to be perfect. If you have a round Lego block, then it doesn't assemble itself right. Okay? So now imagine that planet Earth is like a universal seed for planets to express themselves through life. And so that's why we have to achieve harmony before we leave the planet, because out of us achieving a planetary harmony, it's almost as if it enables all of the other planets across all the other solar systems to express themselves in their own way and not the way that Elon Musk, foresaw or decided arbitrarily, right? So it's this thing that we have to create the perfect kind of balance or harmony here on this planet to reach that kind of stage where from that it can blow up in a million different versions of Earth, you could say, or versions of Mars, or versions of whatever. Just like that first cell divided and that had individual lives and individual experiences. You see. So you can think of like part of humanity going, to Mars, part of them going to Venus, part of them going to other places. But every time keeping that kind of perfect harmony that we've had in the very at that stage right now that we're developing, that is, yeah, just perfectly balanced. I don't know how to express it in another way. It's just like if we're not perfectly balanced, then it's just like that first cell. If it had a defect and it couldn't manifest, I don't know, like carnivores or whatever, then it cannot reach the next stage, which is solving problems at the planetary scale and whatever. So I'm saying we're growing life and we're expanding it into the universe, but what we're really doing is expanding consciousness into the universe. So you have the living cell, and then you expand that into a body, which is like a human body, and that's like growing consciousness, the envelope of consciousness to a larger scale. And then humans forming a global collective organism is a planet reaching self-awareness or consciousness. And then multiple planets interacting with each other would be like a solar system becoming self-aware. And then you just go on and on and on until the universe experiences itself as a single unitary being, and then you're back to square one, basically. And so it's almost as if the universe is just going this in and out kind of thing where it limits itself super granularly until it gives itself the illusion it's just a single cell organism. And that's the biggest, densest kind of illusion of compacting consciousness into this thing. And then consciousness just has to do the other trip, the reverse trip of growing and expanding consciousness again to re-embrace its entirety. And then it just does this continuously because it's fun. Because it's fun. And that's all. Maybe that's the parting message: is that ultimately that's what it's all about. It should be fun. It should be a fun process, right? It's almost like drinking yourself to death to have amnesia, and then rediscovering who you are progressively, and thinking, oh, I'm actually this, like remembering who you are, basically, and that's what the process is all about, you know.
Oh,
So it's difficult to express with words because again, it's going beyond materialism. It's beyond looking at planets as just big balls of dead piece of rock or whatever. And it also requires you to like break linear time space and all these kinds of concepts.
I have another question related to resources.
Mhm.
You mentioned that the solution of most scientists would be the equivalent of cutting the cord to stop consuming our mother's blood, which takes, among other things, the form of oil at our level of reality, the blood of this planet. limit human births, which is the stopping of the growth of the baby, and limit consumption, which means swallowing strictly the amount of amniotic fluid that the placenta is able to produce and recycle, even if it requires impeding on the development of many cells and parts of the body. Um, this is more like an abortion than a real solution, or at best an attempt to achieve an artificial state of stasis. I guess you're referring to Dali's steady state economy here. Um, am I right? And then, if so, I'm not really sure if you can see this as a state of stasis, given that the growth can continue, like the expanding universe, uh, and can continue perpetuating experience in other areas like social, intellectual, and spiritual. So perhaps even along the lines of evolution of consciousness that you are talking about. Could you elaborate on this?
Yeah, so here it's all about like, okay, fine, we're met with these finite resources. Why are they finite? Why do they seem finite? And how can we move beyond this? So I was already mentioning the fact that humanity needs to raise its level of consciousness, because if you granted free energy right now, or like 50 years ago or 100 years ago, when people weren't yet accustomed to, mass consumerism and dealing with the fallout of, pollution and all that stuff, and having that consciousness of like the impact they can have on the environment if they don't manage to sort of tie in the consumption in a kind of loop that nature has, within its functioning, basically that whatever your excrements are is the resource in nature for some other creature, and then everything is kind of recycled in that loop. So one insight that I have had is that the baby's relationship to the mother and the mother's resources is exactly the same as the relationship of society to resources on this planet. That is, the baby cannot tap directly into the energy that the mother is breathing on the outside, in the outside world. But for the mother, from the mother's perspective, that energy is infinite. The oxygen that you're breathing right now, you're not in a kind of, you're not under the impression that that oxygen is finite, right? It's just infinite. You can breathe in, breathe out, and you're not feeling like you're stealing that energy from someone. It's really massively abundant. But the baby doesn't have access to that energy, not yet at least. It has to go through the metabolization process of the mother in order to access that energy, and then through the placenta and the bloodstream. If you look at humanity, every single energy that we're tapping into right now is ultimately solar energy. It is energy from the sun that has been metabolized by this planet over billions of years, or millions of years, to be turned into resources that we can directly consume and use. Oil, for instance, is organic matter, decomposed dinosaurs and plants that have been compressed there for millions of years and transformed into this resource. But ultimately, all those plants, that energy was solar in the beginning. Like they built themselves based on photosynthesis and growth, leveraging the sun's energy. And so it's very old metabolized sun energy that we're actually consuming. And if you're looking at the progress in nuclear fusion, what we're trying to do is to replicate the energy of the sun, like creating a miniature version of the sun on this planet, which means you are bypassing the metabolization process of the planet in order to access the resources of the sun. Now, solar energy in terms of solar panels, that's like just like the very, very beginnings of that kind of logic and that kind of process. It's like, towards the end of pregnancy, a baby has kind of hiccups, inside the womb to prepare the lungs to function, because otherwise they're not ready to sort of open up, when he's outside the womb and starts breathing with his own lungs. But then again, imagine if that baby was born and inside of it, there was a cancer growing, or like one of the organs was a cancer. The moment it starts breathing, all that energy is going to be used in a way that is self-destructive, which means that it's going to access abundant infinite energy, but it's not going to help that baby sort of stabilize and grow naturally. It's going to actually destroy itself. It's the same as when you're harboring a cancer inside your body. If you feed, when you're feeding yourself, you're actually feeding that cancer more than the other cells, and it just takes over the body and kills you. So, and also, if the baby tries to start breathing inside the womb, it's too early, it's going to suffocate and die. And so it's the same kind of fractal projection at the level of humanity. If we start developing nuclear fusion or accessing nuclear fusion while our level of consciousness is still blocked at the stage of mass consumerism, capitalism, infinite growth, then of course we're going to self-destruct, right? But you can see that all of these transitions are occurring almost simultaneously, which is the case for a baby. Like the moment he starts breathing with his lungs is exactly the moment where you cut the umbilical cord and when he's outside the womb. And so it's that kind of thing, like for instance, a young adult, when he leaves his parents' home, he's simultaneously, starting to work and have more money, working student jobs and stuff like that to pay for his own kind of rent and all that stuff. And then severing his ties with, the parents' financial resources progressively, right? And so there is that transition there. And you can see the same occurring with humanity, where we are shifting beyond the debt-based monetary system with new systems like crypto assets, and blockchain, which is a totally different logic of monetary creation. And the relative theory of money ties in nicely with that, because again, it's a totally different logic of creating money, which is not based on repaying interest and this whole obligation of growth. And so, and then you have also the emergence of nuclear fusion, and these two are intimately tied because it's the same logic and process. And so the steady state economy, yeah, go ahead. If you want to.
Yeah. So I would love you to elaborate on the steady state economy as well. But you mentioned nuclear fusion. So this is just one of the forms of us harnessing the sun's power or trying to replicate it. I've been also exposed to high hopes because people in the energy world, they say fusion is like for 50 years saying that it's the next thing, and at the moment it's still 50 years. um, so there was high hopes on something called thorium salt liquid reactors, which is nuclear fission, if I'm correctly. Um, is that is that just another form? Because it's not really the sun's energy, I believe, right? Or is it just another form of the sun's energy as well?
Yeah, so in my mind, well, there are many things to discuss here. I mean, the first one is nuclear fission, I believe, is just a step towards nuclear fusion or clean energy. Because if you look at the way that you breathe in and out, it's not creating any kind of damaging or pollution, kind of like radioactive, material that you need to deal with. It's carbon dioxide that is then recycled by the plants, and so you're not polluting your environment when you're breathing out, right? Whereas with nuclear fission, you're creating this polluting material. There's a leftover of radioactive matter that's left after nuclear fission, which is again the same kind of process as the baby. When he's still inside the womb, he's producing pollutants for that kind of environment in the envelope where he is, because he's peeing in that womb, emitting his excrements, and in that womb, there aren't all the mechanisms that enable the recycling of that pollution. And so it's again staying in that kind of relationship. But then with regards to nuclear fusion, if it's not here yet, it's because again, like we tend to focus so much on the technical advances and technology and stuff, more than the advances of consciousness, which means that in my view, we will not be allowed, quote unquote, to access nuclear fusion until our consciousness are ready for it, and then that's kind of the counterintuitive way of thinking, is that we think that we're just lacking the technical knowledge, right? But there is an intelligence that is sitting above this, that is saying, no way I'm going to allow these monkey, mutant, crazy people accessing nuclear fusion and having that one idea or those ideas that are going to actually make a change and shift and finalize, the technology, if they remain in that state of consciousness. And it's the same kind of relationship as a parent has to their child. If a child is like 5 years old, you're not going to give them a table saw to play with or a gun, right? As a parent that that would not be a good idea for their level of consciousness and responsibility. You're not going to let them drive your car. And so we have to be humble and recognize that there is a kind of wisdom that sits above this, above us, that presides over the formation of humanity becoming a global viable collective organism, planetary, if you think, and saying that all the events that are happening are actually tailored to achieve that end state. Now, in biology, there's a field that's called, the concept that's called an attractor, a biological attractor. It means that it's like a final state that attracts an organ to be fully formed and to be fully mature, And it's like, if you look at Michael Levin's work, for instance, that is a very good microbiologist, a fascinating research. He's showing that the cells, a group of cells, create a sort of bioelectric field that serves as a kind of end state for the full formation of the organ. And then when they reach that state, then they stop. It's unlike a cancer, which just grows and grows and grows, and there's no end to it until it kills the organism. In a baby, the organs grow until they reach full maturity, which is like this attractor, and then they stop. Now, apply that same principle to humanity. It's just like when you cut yourself, you cut yourself, and there's all kinds of things that happen in your body spontaneously to heal that wound. You scratch yourself, you start bleeding again, and the body again sets into motion to try to repair that. So apply that same principle to humanity. Humanity does some stupid things, and then certain events are triggered to be able to reach that end state, which is forming a global, collective, finalized, fully mature global organism. And that also includes, putting roadblocks or preventing the development of certain technologies or certain things if we're not ready and mature. It's exactly the same thing again, as I was saying. A baby cannot start breathing while inside the womb. It's just not going to work. It's going to kill itself. Humanity cannot gain the necessary knowledge to pierce the secret of nuclear fusion until we reach the necessary level of consciousness and global functioning at the human level to be able to leverage it correctly. And again, it's also, for instance, I don't believe that nuclear fusion is again going to be implemented as this kind of centralized mass, mega projects that are billions and billions of euros and that are going to be under the control of a few monopoly, huge companies that are extracting rent from society, because that's not how your lungs work. Your lungs are not there, trading their oxygen for, okay, I'll give you oxygen for the body, but you need to remunerate me with billions of, it's ridiculous, right? And if you look at, there's certain articles that I've seen, like a guy that managed, a student that managed to create a mini nuclear fusion reactor just using an AI and LLMs. It's amazing. It's amazing. And so what I think is that it's more going to be these decentralized small nuclear fusion reactors that are dispersed all over the planet with a smart electric grid, which allows rerouting electricity in a smart way, combined with mining Bitcoin and all kinds of other and batteries and all kinds of other kind of hardware that allow for energy, if there's an excess of energy, can be diverted to mining or going to batteries or, in a very resilient kind of architecture, which is exactly, the way your body is supposed to work as well. It's very resilient, and that's the future. It's not like this one big, huge power plant, which if you shut it down, then humanity is in the dark, right? That would be completely absurd and counterproductive. And that's the whole decentralization movement that ties into this as well. It's like small nuclear fusion reactors at the level of the city. Each city has its own. They're all interconnected. If one goes down, then there can be a rerouting, just like the internet is built. And more like owned by the community, not by these mega centralized companies.
Yes.
Yeah.
before we go to the steady state economy, um, two things I want to say. Thank you for introducing the idea of attractor to me, because I had only come across it in the work of Smachtenberger,
Mm.
with his idea to strive for the third attractor. So now I understand how I think he means um, uh, this title of his work. Um, and the second thing I want to say is that the it's related again to nuclear fission, because I heard about it by Simon Michaud, and he also has this decentralized aspect, because they could. I think there's in Denmark there's already these small nuclear fission reactors that can provide power for a small community, and they say we're going to ship 2027 to 27, 28, something like that. So it also, this decentralized aspect is also embedded in it. So it could indeed be a nice step towards, as a
Mm.
uh, yeah, call it an experiment towards nuclear fusion.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
and yeah, so basically, this actually is a nice way to introduce the philosophy underlying my whole work. It is that all of the what I'm saying and what you're also saying is that we're not, and none of this is occurring by chance. There's a pattern there that we're following. We're going there inevitably, almost. Just like, the concept of attractors is you're going to end up there inevitably. The only choice that you have is going there consciously and knowing where you're going, and therefore letting go and saying, okay, this is the pattern, this is where I'm going to end up anyways, and so let's go there consciously. Or, fighting just like you're in a river and you're splashing all around and whatever. The river's going to get wherever it wants you to go, is going to get you there, but you're going to either be tired and wasted and exhausted, or you will have enjoyed the ride and played along. And so it's this thing where I see humanity sometimes now as, that game where you have the rope and you have two teams pulling on the rope, that are trying to make the other team fall, right? So imagine
Paddleboard.
that you have, yeah, imagine if you have like the ecologists on the one side that are tugging in one direction, the petroleum industry and the fossil fuels pulling in the other direction. Unbeknownst to themselves, they're actually moving forward like this, like laterally, basically, when they each think that they are actually trying to pull the other camp to their side, but they're actually moving that way. They could just drop the rope and start moving in that direction together, but they're going to arrive at the same point anyways. It's just that they're wasting effort pulling in each of their directions, but they'll get where they need to be going, right? It's just this illusion that we have as humans that we're controlling something here, that uh, these are patterns that are in each of us, right? Each of us has grown in a mother's womb. Nobody was born in cabbages or was brought by a flying crane or something. Everybody has grown in a mother's womb. Everybody has grown with parents and went through the stages of being a baby, a child, an adolescent, a teenager, and leaving their parents' home eventually. So all of these are patterns that are deeply ingrained in every single human. And we're just replicating all of this at the next kind of fractal level with concepts that get in the way and that distort patterns that are pristine and well tried out and well balanced. But when you place concepts on top of it, then we sort of skew this and distort it a bit. But still, it's still those same patterns that we're following in our development, right? And you mentioned Schmachtenberger, for instance. I mean, I greatly respect him and his intentions of trying to um, uh, vanquish Moloch and save humanity and whatever. But that kind of approach is precisely what needs to change, because in order to save the world, you need the world to need to be saved. You need a world that needs saving in order for you to save the world. You understand? So if you're serious about understanding that we're just playing a role here, we're just on a big, it's just like life is a big play. And when you enter on stage and you're on your sheet, there's a certain number of things that you've written down as an actor, saying, for instance, I'm an ecologist, whatever. Then once you're on stage, you have to be confronted with somebody from the oil industry that's going to give you the line to your whatever you've written on your little paper as an identity, as what you want to play, as a role that you set for yourself. Otherwise, you're going to feel alone on your stage. It's ridiculous. Imagine, and this is like a thought experiment that I try to ingrain into people that are deeply into ecology. Imagine if you snap your fingers right now and all of the ecological problems are solved instantly, all around the world. Who are you and what are you doing? Who are you and what are you doing? Because so many people are identified so deeply with the fact that they're an ecologist, that they want to fight for the environment, whatever, that if actually all the problems were solved, a big part of them would have to die in order to reinvent themselves as being somebody new. And so we don't even realize unconsciously that we're unconsciously creating the problems in order to be able to play the role that we've assigned ourselves as an identity, and so that we don't feel alone on stage. So, in other words, why I'm not taking the I want to save the world approach, it's because I don't want the world to be in a state that needs saving, if you understand what I mean. What I'm saying is, I'm more in the kind of mindset of all of this is a pattern. We're repeating something, and I just want to shed light on what's happening so we can do it consciously instead of unconsciously. And it's saying that this is an evolutionary process, and thereby I'm not needing the world to be in a bad shape. It's not necessary in my worldview, and thereby I'm not contributing to creating those problems in the first place in order to be able to play the role that I want to play for myself, you know? And that's a kind of mind. It's difficult. It's difficult to grasp the profundity of of this kind of mindset, because you realize that you're creating the problems that you want to solve by that kind of mindset for yourself in order to be who you want to be. And we don't want to take that responsibility. We want to pretend like the world is in a state that needs saving, and that's not in our control, and we just happen to take on the role of the one that wants to save the world. But that's not how it works. Both go together intimately. Um, so yeah,
Yeah. This is clearly something that I'm not grappling yet, because I recognize the moment when I found some kind of new meaning or identity, in the field of ecological economics, because I found a lot of answers in that by reading the book Introduction to Ecological Economics. Um, so this is an interesting point to this to further explore for me. But at least, as mentioned before, is that you already created this distance from me, from yeah, this being aware of the identification with is the first step, let's say.
mm-hmm.
So
Well,
yeah.
you see, so one of the things that I want to underline also is ultimately, if you really, really think about it, all that we're doing as humans is we're just shoving concepts together and creating a kind of puzzle with them. And some assemblages of these words and concepts create a harmonious kind of assemblage, and others create something dissonant to us, right? So if I put a certain number of concepts or words together, like I'm going to kill you or whatever, it sounds like, oh, this is not a nice way to assemble these concepts and words. It doesn't feel good. And then if I put another sentence together, like I love you, then you're like, oh, that's a nice little assemblage of concepts and words. So we are in the business of assembling concepts together, even as I'm speaking now, that either create harmony or dissonance. That's the only thing you're doing, like assembling atoms together and forming a molecule, right? That's going to have a certain impact in the world. And so Schmachtenberger is playing with these concepts and assembling them together. Kant, all the philosophers, all the ecological people, everyone is playing with these concepts and putting them together. What I'm trying to say is you can't remove any concept from reality. And that is probably something that we could spend hours discussing, the implications of that. It's like you cannot just remove the uranium atom because you don't like it, because it's toxic or something. It's like, okay, you know what? Let's get rid of the uranium atom. That doesn't work. But what you can do is you can reshuffle those atoms in a way that creates harmony out of the combination of those things, these elements. And so that is what I'm trying to do every single time with everything. It's like trying to assemble concepts in a way that doesn't require you to try to fight against them or destroy any of them. Like placing capitalism and communism and all these things in an evolutionary trajectory, which is natural and normal, it doesn't create resistance anymore to those systems or a sort of a willingness to destroy anything. It's just like, okay, or anything, or racism or whatever. And you just see that as a normal a normal step in the development of humanity and stage, and then you remove the resistance so you can move past that and beyond that and onto something else. You understand?
Yes. So you triggered me there in a positive way. So the difference that I'm noticing with with other thought leaders that I had have been following, the last point that you mentioned, as in reshuffling concepts to yeah harmonize them, let's say. Um, that makes me think of the approach that um, Daniel Christian Wall is advocating a lot, trying to yeah go acknowledge the tension between two concepts that are inherently there, um, which basically allows you to go beyond this linear thinking of from to. Let's say I got this whole idea from his article about you know this change from ego thinking to eco thinking to Seba thinking. And this is often depicted in a very linear trajectory. You need to move from ego, we are maybe now a bit eco, and we need to go to Seva. But what he actually done is created something new, it basically acknowledging that if we go fully eco thinking, then we deny the necessity of self-care because then we try to pretend that the ego is not there, which is a pitfall. So he says we need to acknowledge both of these tensions and try to channel them towards in service to life. So this is what you made me think of. So first of all, my question would be, is that along the lines as you're thinking? And then secondly, what I notice is that although uh, Wall has some kind of evolution towards you know regenerative living, as in finding our role in nature and uh, yeah beyond the reconciliarity of us in nature, but fully taking our place as a keystone species, or maybe we're not even a keystone species and we pretend to be a keystone species. But I'm wondering, what is your view on this? Because this is the kind of where my knowledge is at, and maybe you can, if you shoot on this, then things land for me in a good way.
Yeah. So I mean, there are many thinkers that are in that kind of mindset. Like for instance, Ken Wilbert in his integral theory. There's also spiral dynamics, where you see the last stage, Teal, which is holistic, which is kind of this integrative approach. Um, so it's not a new idea, right? It's something that I've just stumbled upon, and I've realized that many of the people are also working along the same lines of thinking. But it's just a repeating pattern once again. Like you don't get rid of any atom, you just integrate them into a harmonious molecular configuration. You get rid of any molecule, you integrate them into a harmonious configuration. You don't get rid of any living species, you integrate them into a coherent, harmonized ecosystem, which is balanced. You don't get rid of any ideas or concepts, you integrate them into an ecosystem of ideas and concepts that is balanced and in equilibrium and in balance, right? So you can think of all the ideas and concepts that we've created as an ecosystem in itself. And right now, that ecosystem is wildly imbalanced with all kinds of crazy stuff happening, raging, and species invading each other, whatever. Just a repetition pattern of biology as well, because ecosystems in the very beginning weren't all that stable. It took time for nature and biology to kind of develop that kind of wisdom of stability and between different species. with all kinds of, games happening of like, oh, I'm going to create a bigger shell to protect myself. I'm going to create bigger teeth and I'm going to be faster and catch prey and whatever. And then ultimately you sort of reach a kind of, equilibrium at that stage. And the same is happening with ideas, like, oh, I'm going to create this capitalist, super aggressive thing, and I'm going to create the social movement that is going to, but ultimately all that, needs to sort of wither away. And then it's important to sort of let go of concepts in with the right frame of mind. So what I'm saying, you can't destroy anything. Certain things can disappear, but they disappear not because you're in resistance and you want to kill them, but just because they had their time and they're gone, right? And so it's important to kind of, that's why you have to be kind of neutral to this and not be pro or against something. Just realize that something doesn't serve you again and you can let it go, right? And so I have also these thought experiments in order to help be in a state of mind where you can make decisions, but you're doing them based on preference and not on this absolute ultimate truth that if you don't act like this, then it's terrible or it's bad or whatever. So the first example I have is when you're choosing your vacation to go to a city, for instance, you don't classify cities from ranked by, evilness or something. And this one is the most evil and this one is the best. And then you're not saying, I'll go on vacation to the most, best or good city, but I have to first destroy the most evil city and send an atomic bomb to and that would be ridiculous, right? So you don't make decisions about that. You do it based on your internal preferences. And thereby, you're not also creating any tensions or frictions in that decision because it's just expressing a preference. Now, I'll tell you a story, for instance. I don't know if it's true or not. It's just to get people in a frame of mind. Imagine, the 12 constellations of the zodiac? Imagine if all those stars were actually solar systems that wanted to harbor life to express themselves on their planets, to express so that the planets could express themselves with all the full potential of that matter, animate that matter, and create all kinds of crazy stories, right? But then these advanced consciousnesses residing at the center of those suns, the black hole, they were scratching their heads and they were saying, you know what? We, with our super advanced consciousness, we can see where life can lead. It can lead to, massive intergalactic wars with, spaceships destroying planets, and it can lead to all kinds of crazy stuff, like with huge cancerous organisms just taking over the planet and then dying because they've managed to swallow everything up. And oh my God, all that is terrible. You know what we're going to do? We're going to project our consciousness onto this one little planet, which will create to be the perfect playground or testing ground or way to sort of calibrate life to have almost all of the experiences so that it's tailored, it's calibrated, it's perfect in order for us when we implant life on our various planets, it'll be so well calibrated that it's not going to steer off course and go into all those crazy directions, right? And so we're going to have all these carnivores having the experiences eating predators and prey. We're going to have humans experience with wars, genocide, and all these terrible things, and poverty and richness and inequality and whatever. They're going to have all those experiences at a kind of miniature scale so that when we create life on our respective planets, well, it's not going to go in those crazy directions. There'll be a mix of everything and it's going to be harmonized. It's going to be nice, right? Because if you think about it, imagine if we actually leave this planet, we didn't have the experience of world wars or genocide, and then those problems resurface once we're multiplanetary and we create a genocide of an entire planet and not of a people, Whatever problem you haven't solved at a certain lower level of reality, if you think about it, just mushrooms and becomes bigger at a higher level of reality. It's just like a tree that would grow, sideways like this. The more it grows, the bigger the fall and the harder the consequences once it falls and topples over, right? So you need to make sure that life is calibrated perfectly, in order to avoid going into these terrible directions. And so from then on, those advanced consciousnesses, they projected their consciousness onto planet Earth, and there are two ways that they can get back that wisdom. Either we destroy ourselves on this planet, and our consciousnesses just, leave our bodies and go back to whatever these stars are. And those stars then project their consciousnesses onto water that is in those planets and give them the intuition of the molecules to assemble and to form life, and then life sprouts in that way on those planets. Or we humans build spaceships, leave the solar system, go there physically, and implant life from our spaceships using, laboratories and whatever, seeding these planets with life. Ultimately, it's the same. The result is exactly the same. The end result is the same. But the path you're going to take to lead to that result is different. One is, you could say going from above, guiding, life from below. One is actually going there physically and doing it from below. You know what I mean? So and I'm not saying you have to believe this story, but understand what this means. It means that we actually do have a choice because the end result will be the same. And therefore, now we can choose what we prefer and not pretend like, well, we don't have a choice. We have to survive, or you know what I mean? It's like, you can let this go. You can be like, okay, whatever happens, it's going to be fine. But because I'm a human, I'm incarnated, I'm in a physical body, I know that having to experience the end of the world is not going to be a pleasant experience for this body. Therefore, I don't want to experience that kind of, scenario. I prefer that we form a global, collective, harmonious organism at the level of this planet, that we leave it and seed life and become, galactic gardeners and spread life in that way. And there's no more emotional charge there. There's no more, you're not trying to, absolutely save the world, whatever. You understand that you're actually just picking an experience with the same kind of lightheartedness as picking your next vacation for the city you want to go to. And no longer saying, oh my God, we don't have a choice. If we destroy ourselves, this is the end of the universe and it's over and it's life is, you're like, hey, okay, chill. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So,
That's
yeah.
that's the kind of feeling that I got. It's like a pressure fell away by reading your book. So I was very happy about that. And once again, when you when you tell this, I recall from like laughing out loud when I read about nuking the city that you think is evil. It's like
Yeah,
and and the other thing I want to say is that it's like the thing that gives me this relaxed feeling is the view of us being a fail-safe probe of yeah of life of
exactly. Yeah.
let's go to the next thing. Yeah, you mentioned that the financial system is the most important domino to fall, which will set up a chain reaction. Um, so I've been also reading up on the change movement with regard to monetary systems, um, mainly, well, it's international focus, but recently also related to the Netherlands. And things go really slow, as in a decade is nothing if I see this trajectory. And um, what's your view on this? Because also lots of talk is going on again about it, um, an economic crisis bound to happen again because we didn't really fix the fundamental issues we had to fix in 2008. Simon Michaud, for instance, predicted it to happen this year. So we're running short on time with that in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just if you want to share what your view is on this area.
Yeah. So I already talked about Bitcoin being the fat of humanity, right? Remember that?
No,
Yeah.
no, no, not in this
Oh, I
call, I
didn't.
think.
Not on this call.
No,
Okay. Well, in any
I,
case,
I remember it from the book, but
yeah. So, I mean, if you start looking at things symbolically, then things start to make sense. So, a baby before it's being born, it stocks up on fat because it has to weather the transition from being fed by the umbilical cord, the bloodstream, and the placenta, to breathing with its own lungs and eating food with organs that are yet immature, right? Sort of immature, and so in order to weather that transition from one way of feeding to another way of feeding, you need to stack up on fat, which is kind of like a safety cushion for weathering that transition. And if you look at Bitcoin, it actually the I mean, the resemblance between that kind of mechanism is stunning. That is, in order to store fat, you need to expand energy in order to transform a certain number of molecules into molecules that are directly assimilable by your body, right? That can be assimilated by your body directly. In order to mine Bitcoin, you have to transform one form of energy, which is electricity, into an energy that is directly usable by humans in order to transact, which is Bitcoin. And so if you imagine that the whole system would suddenly collapse, like the whole banking system would collapse because there would be a certain number of big banks that collapse, and then all movements, all bank accounts, everything would be frozen. What system exists today that is planetary in scale? That means you can use it all over the planet in order to continue transacting while the system is failed and is collapsed and is down. And there's only Bitcoin, right? Otherwise, it's national systems or multinational systems like the BRICS system, the SWIFT network. There isn't a global system right now that is neutral, quote unquote, that is accessible to anyone. Anybody can create an account. Anybody can start receiving payments. And in order for weathering the transition from one system, which is the fiat-based monetary system, to something else, which I would prefer be based on the relative theory of money, but it can be another system. It doesn't really matter. But it's just an alternative way of functioning that doesn't require the whole interest on debt kind of mechanism, because that one is unfit for purpose for the next stage of evolution of humanity, right? And so if you think about it, actually, we're thinking that things are moving slowly, but Bitcoin only exists since 2009. It's only been 13 years. It's nothing. If you look at the internet, where was the internet in, like, it emerged somewhere in the 1980s. Where was the internet in the late 1990s, right? Or the early 2000s? I mean, it was basically a prototype. I mean, there's nothing really useful. I was downloading MP3 files in 2000, and it took an hour to download one song. And I had these crazy modems that were going, doing all that noise. And when I was surfing on the internet, my parents couldn't call because it was on the same phone line, So, I mean, we don't realize this. It's crazy, right? And look at us 25 years later. And so you can see that Bitcoin is following this adoption trend. And it's not by chance to me that it's being used and adopted more and more, because we're probably stacking up on this sort of fat to prepare for this kind of transition, symbolically speaking. Now, I totally agree with you that we're on the verge of another crisis. So many economists are talking about it. I mean, central banks are starting to lower their interest rates now. The Fed cut by 50 basis points. Central bank cut by your ECB cut by 25 basis points. And the pattern of cutting from this high level where they're scared about the economy and inflation is the same as in 2007, 2008, when they were also talking about, we're start cutting rates and doing more and more emergency cuts. And if you look at what the Wall Street Journal was saying at the time is, oh my God, the Fed is cutting rates, but look, the economy is doing well, and inflation is going to come back. But they were actually on the verge of a crash, right? And obviously, this crisis is going to be much more severe because the states have no more this kind of fiscal leeway that they had in 2008, where they can, take on more debt and whatever to weather the shock and pay for, and bailouts of these big banks. With COVID, with everything that happened, plus all the geopolitical tensions that are there, come on, this crisis is going to be way massive. But again, what I'm advocating for, and the reason why I'm talking about, the relative theory of money, is because ultimately you could create a smooth transition from the existing system to another system. You could decide right now, you just get together with all the European banks, sit down on a table and say, every citizen chooses one bank account on which they're going to receive the universal dividend, right? From now on, banks will grant less and less loans based on debt creation, and more loans based on pooling of capital from consumers that creating a bond, and then that bond pays a yield, for instance. And that's already a system that exists in Denmark, meaning banks would therefore no longer create money. They would be mere intermediaries between people that need to borrow money and people that have excess money to invest, right?
Yeah.
And you can do that with the relative theory of money, because now the creation destruction cycle of money isn't based on creation of money through a loan and destruction through repayment of a loan, but through gradual debasement or devaluation based on, you know, the mathematical properties of, you know, how you recalculate the universal dividend's value over time, right? And obviously, you know, I can't explain how the relative theory of money works right now in this video because it would take too long, but there are many videos that you can leverage where this is well explained on the internet. And so that would be a smooth transition. The alternative would be to have chaos with Bitcoin as a kind of stabilizer for a while, and then we have to recreate a new system altogether, you know, and you know, forget about, you know, the existing system that we have right now, which I'm not in favor of, because that will be experienced as a massive hardship for millions and millions of people, right? And if you look at what happens to a baby after birth, if you cut the umbilical cord directly and rely on the baby to directly start breathing and stuff, typically in the first 2 or 3 days, the baby loses weight, which means there's an excess number of cellular deaths compared to births, which means, you know, at the level of humanity, the baby loses about 10% of its weight, right, after birth. You know what 10% of 8 billion people is? You know, I mean, think about it. That's 800 million people dying, right? And this is for a baby, it's over a span of 2 or 3 days. For humanity, it might be 2 or 3 decades. You know, all of these time scales are obviously stretched because as a global organism, all of these transitions are taking more time at the level of humanity. So but ultimately, again, the result will be the same, right? This transition is going to happen. It either is going to happen smoothly and consciously, or it's going to happen abruptly and terribly. And this is where I have to sort of let go. I'm putting this information out there, but the transition will be perfect and tailored for the needs of humanity for its own evolution. You know what I mean? And so this is a way of thinking which can be a bit distressing. You know, it's like, imagine if you are an intelligence that looks at the life of a human being and you can see every single, like almost like lightning, you can see every branch and potential decisions where that life could go, right? And you see that at 16, based on where that person is right now, at 16 years old, that person is going to cut his hand off because he's not paying attention using a table saw. And so you as a soul say, okay, what I'm going to do is at 5 years old, I'm going to make that person, you know, hit his finger with a hammer. It's going to hurt a lot. It's going to also cause pain. But because of that experience, then that person is going to steer clear of the parallel timeline where at 16 years old, they cut their hand off, because now they're more careful around tools, right? And so what is a minor catastrophe at that level avoids a major catastrophe later on. But you can only see that as a blessing in disguise when you're looking at that higher kind of point of view where you can, you know, you're beyond space and time and you can see. And so imagine that there's an intelligence that presides over humanity and sees that kind of point of view and says, okay, this is where humanity's consciousness is. If I make a smooth transition, they won't learn because they're not at the level of consciousness where they've transitioned, they've lived through 10 or 20 years of chaos and saying, okay, now that we lived through this, we're ready for accepting, you know, a system that is more egalitarian or, you know, more, you know, compassionate and more fair. Otherwise, they might transition to the system directly and then not have their lessons integrated and fully learned. You know what I mean? Which would create more problems down the road. And so I don't have that point of view. I don't know. I can only express my preference as one cell in that body that's saying, hey, guys, I don't want to experience the abrupt transition because it's going to be a hardship. Maybe not for me. I don't know if it's going to be a hard transition for me, because maybe because I'm aware of these kind of patterns and points of view, I might weather it a bit better. But for my fellow humans, it's going to be difficult. And I'm not the kind of person to want other people to suffer if there's no need for that suffering, right? But again, I have to also let go of my expectations for that result. So yes, there is going to be a crash and a collapse. I don't know if it's going to be fast or not, that transition, because again, it depends. If you look at a baby's birth, it can take 2 hours, it can take 30 minutes, it can take 24 hours, right? All of that, pushing, contractions and pain, whatever. And that birth process is tailored to each organism. So maybe the transition will take 20 years, maybe 30, maybe 40. I don't know. I just know what the end result is going to be. And I just can share this information, and hope that it's going to be a smooth transition. That's all I can hope for.
Thanks for sharing that. Um, the way you explain the relative theory to money in your book presentation, is that the one that you would recommend? Because I can put it into the show notes whenever I put it on
Yeah,
mine.
that can be a good way. I mean, I have other videos online, but if you type the relative theory of money on YouTube, you can find. I recorded two other videos which explain this more in detail. So I mean, yeah,
Okay.
you can.
Very good.
People will find it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because we're running short on time for this one. Um, there's two things I want to go back to something, because first, the thing we didn't address yet is, I think, the steady state economy because
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
skipped to
Yeah.
the financial system. And the second thing, people, by taking this role, or it's about the contrasting, well, what is it, dissonance of the concepts that we create. Is it the people that view something as bad? Is that this focused attention on it as bad, or something that they're fighting against? Is that what it causes to get bigger? Because this is a saying that I remember from something throughout my life. Whatever you give attention grows, Is this the kind of thing that we need to overcome? We just need to say, okay, this is not for me. I'm going to do this path because it has my preference, and I'll let go of what the development of the thing is that I actually don't really like. I'm just gonna mind my own business.
So I'll answer the second question first because it's easiest. Absolutely, yes. That is absolutely how it is. And the thing is, people might think that this is some esoteric, spiritual nonsense. But once you delve deeply into the ontology of the origins of the universe and consciousness itself, then it starts to make more sense. And this, I can't explain this in this video. I have many videos in my other channels that talk about spirituality and stuff. But ultimately, the only thing that exists is conscious attention and awareness. And that's ultimately all we're trading. Ultimately, it's imagine that all that exists is just existence and awareness, or a consciousness attached to that existence, and then mechanisms that allow for capturing and trading various intensities of that attention. Okay, so when you're eating, you're not eating a fruit. You're actually forcing a part of reality to pay attention to you, which makes you have the feeling of existing a little bit stronger, which gives you the sensation of having been fed and being, feeling nice, about it. But what's really going on in the background is you as a human, you are spending energy by giving attention to this outer reality, and you need to recapture attention by forcing this reality to pay attention to you. Otherwise, your attention escapes from you, and so you need to replenish. It's almost as if you're asking this universal consciousness to say, hey, hey, who, pay attention to me right here, Martin. Please make sure that I continue to exist. And what I'm going to do there is I'm going to take something from this reality which you're paying attention to as a universal consciousness, which captured your attention, like a fruit, like a tree, like a plant, like a vegetable. I'm going to eat it. And that process is like saying, I'm transforming that attention that you're giving to that fruit into, now you have to pay attention to being me and not being that fruit. And what it takes the form of is the whole process of digestion and decomposition. That's the visible material side of what's happening. The real thing that's happening on the background is just trading attention. We're just trading attention, basically. That's the ultimate Energy. That's what energy is. What is energy otherwise? What is the ontological properties of energy? How does it emerge even in the first place? And so this entire reality is just a discrepancy in focused attention. Because ultimately, if you look at the ultimate reality of existence, why would existence or this universal consciousness pay more attention to one part than the other? Its attention normally is distributed everywhere symmetrically, and it pays attention to everything indiscriminately. But what happens is life, if you think about it, life is a way of distorting this and saying, pay more attention to me than this other part, right? And it's a way of creating a distortion between focused attention or attention intensities, and then you can trade those attention intensities, and that's what's fundamentally energy and this exchange of energy, and this whole reality is basically a way of a system for distributing attention in an asymmetrical way. Okay? So that it pays more attention to being you than being the void or being nothingness or whatever. Right? And so that's how you link this kind of saying to the more profound ontology of what this reality actually is, and what life is, and what this universe is, and whatever. And then you can create all kinds of mechanisms on top of it. But ultimately, if you scratch down to the surface, like you look at, you click on, your icons on your operating system, that's the visible part of how reality functions. But the underlying reality is just the strings of ones and zeros. Well, the underlying reality for all of this reality is just a way of distributing attention. That's all, right? And so just the final point on this, it's not that you can't save the whales or you can't save the trees or whatever, save the bees. It's just that you cannot cling on to the identity of being a bee saver or being a whale saver. Because once you're not afraid of your identity of doing that role dying, then you can actually really help those, causes without, recreating the problem in the background, because you're afraid of letting that identity of yourself go. You know what I mean? So it doesn't mean like, oh, no, you should let the environment go to hell, right? And do nothing. No, it's just saying like, Alex is really interested in regenerative economics. Okay, dedicate your time and your passion to it, but don't be attached to your identity as the person that is doing all these things, Just say that you're doing them because you like them, and then maybe that one will be over, and then maybe you can transition into something else, right? Yeah.
Quick interruption here. So imagine I would be a passionate whale saver, and I would do it in consciousness of um, it might be that I will be doing this until the rest of my life. If not, if we manage to save enough whales or all the whales, then I'm fine with transitioning to something else. Is that sufficient enough to demarcate this kind of being overly identified with your role? Is
Well,
that how
so
we into
so again, when you're too attached to your role, you will never receive the insight that will enable you to completely and fully solve the problem. That's what I'm saying. Is that, for instance, if you are against the petroleum companies and oil and all that stuff, then you're never going to land on the kind of symbolic analysis that I am having with like nuclear fusion and transition and whatever, because fundamentally it's against who you are. It's against everything that you believe and think, and so um, if you're clinging too tightly to something, then especially if you're judging and you're trying to destroy certain concepts, then you're not going to view the point where you can assemble them in a harmonious way. That's just inevitable because you are in that judgment, and those concepts will resist because they're actually, we don't realize this, but they're actually alive, right? They're real, actual living beings if you think of it. It's just like a plant, like a plant you're trying to rip out of the ground forcefully. It's alive. It wants to continue to live. And when you're trying to destroy a concept, that concept is also alive. We don't realize this, but it is. And it's kind of an etheric, kind of abstract realm of ideas that exists out there. And so if you're trying to destroy something, it's going to come back and haunt you for sure.
So what I now see is that because we clearly tried doing the offensive way towards all these kind of bodies, and still a lot of organizations are in this highly offensive role. In the Netherlands, we have a transition professor. He's a professor of transition. He started in the sustainability field, climate. He was one of the first there. Has been there since 35 years, and he's now working with with these big organizations of trying to bend them or trying to work with them. And of course, he gets a lot of blame for being watered down and on purity and whatever. But if I look at from your perspective, are you saying, well, that system is simply not my preference. We just need to build the new. What he's doing, as in working together with, is also not really the right approach. If I understood your view correctly, because yes, he's really trying to work together with these fossil fuel companies internally to get their durability all going.
Yeah, yeah.
And so,
So
yeah,
So again, it's this role where you understand that you're transitioning from feeding off of your mother's blood in the placenta to breathing with your own lungs, but you're not going to say, the filthy placenta, this blood is terrible, I hate it. To oxygen, this is the right thing to do. This is beautiful. This is I mean, it's a very black and white kind of approach, right? We know that this transition is happening. We know that we're going to gradually transition out of fossil fuels into something else. And so ultimately, if you really think we're a collective, global, decentralized intelligence and organism, then there is going to be a part of humans that are going to work on steadily shutting down the flow of stream of blood that's coming from the placenta to the baby, and ones that are going to work towards finalizing and making sure that the lungs are mature in order to have that transition. And again, it's letting go of this illusion that every single human has to move in the same direction. That's the obsession of society. It's like everybody's trying to convince everybody else that we all need to do the same thing right now. Otherwise, we're all going to be doomed. And that's a problem because that's not how a collective, global, decentralized intelligence works. When you cut your finger, you cut yourself. The stomach doesn't stop digesting and start sending cells, to heal your wound. It just doesn't. There's all kinds of other cells that are doing that, and the stomach just plays its role. And it doesn't mean that you ignore everything. It's just that humans should naturally start paying attention to what resonates with them most deeply. Because some people will be very moved by the economic system, and some people would care less. Some people would just like to play beautiful music. And that's totally fine because maybe you, after a hard day's work, lobbying about economics and stuff, you enjoy going to that concert and having that good time, and it soothes you emotionally and cleanses you and whatever. And so that's how you achieve the fully formed global collective organism, is when you stop trying to control what everybody else is doing, and you realize that the sum total of every single action, that most resonates with who people are, is going to naturally create a coherence that is beyond any of us and what any of us could predict or could anticipate. And that goes back to the steady state economy question, which circles back nicely, is that anytime you're trying to create a system where you're trying to calculate all the inputs, all the outputs, what everybody's doing, and making sure that it all fits into a mathematical formula and you can predict what happens in 10 years, you're screwed. This is not how a global collective intelligence works. And if you read up on the relative theory of money and how it works, it's precisely that kind of logic. It's you give everybody this universal dividend, and their individual decisions every day, where they decide to spend that, creates this natural kind of intelligence where energy is distributed wherever the mass of humanity thinks it should be invested or thinks it should be a priority. But it's not calculable, it's not predictable. And that's what is scary for most, is that we all want to have control. Absolutely. But imagine if your cells had control over you. and imagine if your cells will be able to control you to the point where they have their morning coffee every day at 9 exactly, and you drink exactly the same dose of coffee, and it goes exactly at the right, at the same time in the stomach, and you're not a human anymore. You're a robot. You're a machine. You're not intelligent. You're just, and so at some point you have to let go of this illusion of control and trusting that the sum total of every human decision will create a coherence that is beyond us once you reach a certain level of consciousness. And everything that we've been through, every single stage of our development and evolution, the nation states and all the laws and the justice and all those experiences are there to make sure that once we transition out of these centralized systems onto decentralized ones and create these more, free flowing kind of communities that connect to each other, then it creates not chaos, but a kind of coherence that is almost on the magical level. And you can't anticipate it, but it still is going to be much more powerful and able to solve problems at a level that exceeds what any individual human could calculate or anticipate. And I'm not saying that nation states are bad or whatever. It's like they are, the scaffolding around which you construct a society that is now capable of standing on its own. And it's exactly the same when you transition out from leaving your parents as a young adult and going to live in the world. I mean, your parents, through all of their punishments, all of their, parenting and all of the, all of those formative stages allow you then to self-govern as an individual in the world without having mommy and daddy telling you what to do. You have to wash your clothes, you have to cook your food, you have to wash your dishes. You don't need that kind of voice, nagging you to do these things, because you've been through all those developmental stages, and it prepares you for living as a fully fledged autonomous adult.
When
Yeah.
you talked about this relative theory to money, um, and the way it works out by trusting people, or yeah, letting their inner wisdom
Yeah.
create society, it's a bit like the invisible hand, but then bottom up funded, and because it has this bottom up funding, we also know that people get this, really get something, not like the trickling down that does this didn't work out, of course. So
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
so
So what's nice is that both Marx and Adam Smith were actually describing the same thing. Like your body works with the invisible hand. Like there's no centralized organ that decides what every single cell is supposed to do. But, and Adam Smith actually recognized this in his work. He was already saying that in order to have a totally, really free market, you cannot have participants that are in total imbalance of power with each other, because then it skews the market. You need to have a certain number of like a sort of a balance between those market participants, and then you have the invisible hand that kicks in. And if you look at what Marx said, to each according to his needs, but for each according to his means, it is also this kind of wisdom where in the body, every cell plays its role and it receives the energy it needs to play its role magically, somehow, without a sort of a state that decides who has the certain needs, who has certain means, and what should be produced and what should be done. It's just that it happens, right? And so both are describing a wisdom that is inside of them, to me, and then it's just about combining the two. And that's again the approach of harmonizing ideas and concepts. Instead of seeing them as separate, now you manage to, make a coherence or a harmony, bring harmony to the interaction between those two. So yeah. And yeah, I mean, we'll finish here because I have to leave, but it was really nice talking to you, and we can do a follow-up maybe in a few weeks or months or whatever. Uh,
thanks again, Martin. Enjoy your
Thank you,
day.
Alex. You too. Thanks. It was great talking to you. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.